Let's talk about a different topic, which is what you are calling, your department is calling the Disinformation Governance Board. You unveiled that this week. Republicans are calling it Orwellian and comparing it to the Ministry of Truth in the novel 1984. Can you clarify what exactly is this? What exactly will this Disinformation Governance Board do? Will it monitor American citizens?
Dan, I'm very pleased to do so. It's clear. I mean, those criticisms are precisely the opposite of what this small working group within the Department of Homeland Security will do. And I think we probably could have done a better job of communicating what it does and does not do. So the fact is that disinformation that creates a threat to the security of the homeland is our responsibility to address. And this department has been addressing it for years, throughout the years of the prior administration, and on an ongoing basis. Disinformation from Russia,
right.
China,
We know
Iran.
the problems, but it's still not clear to me how this governance board will act. What will it do?
So what it does is it works to ensure that the way in which we address threats, the connectivity between threats and acts of violence are addressed without infringing on free speech, protecting civil rights and civil liberties, the right of privacy. And the board, this working group, internal working group, will draw from best practices and communicate those best practices to the operators, because the board does not have operational authority.
Will American citizens be monitored?
No.
Guarantee that.
Well, so what we do, we in the Department of Homeland Security don't monitor American citizens.
You don't, but will this board change that?
No. The board does not have any operational authority or capability. What it will do is gather together best practices in addressing the threat of disinformation from foreign state adversaries, from the cartels, and disseminate those best practices to the operators that have been executing in addressing this threat for years.
Republicans are criticizing your decision, the administration's decision to choose Nina Jankowicz to lead this disinformation board. They say she is not somebody who is neutral. Your response?
Eminently qualified, a renowned expert in the field of disinformation. Absolutely so.
There's already this idea, this allegation that there is anti-conservative bias on the platforms, even though there has been study after study proving, in fact, that often it's liberal voices that are being silenced, particularly minority voices on social media.
We've lost sight of the fact that our own government, and certainly President Trump himself, has dealt in disinformation and normalized disinformation over the past 4 years, to the extent that there is no disincentive for most politicians to traffic in it anymore. And this, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, should not be a partisan issue. Democracy isn't possible without authoritative sources of information.
I would love to see a really robust investment in our public broadcasting so that people have an authoritative source of news to go to in order to understand the nuance of situations.
There's a couple of narratives that Russia uses in order to weaken the U.S.-Ukraine relationship. We see this narrative of Ukraine being a corrupt country coming up over and over again, not only in Russian language media, but in U.S. media as well. We saw this in the lead up to the 2020 election here in the United States. With allegations of corruption by Hunter Biden related to Burisma, and we know those came from Russia.
In Russia, the lines are often blurred. If you look at things like Fancy Bear and the cyber attacks that happened on the DNC, those lines aren't as clear. I think we can confidently say, in this case especially, that it was state-sponsored meddling. I think the goal, in contrast to Soviet propaganda, is just to inspire distrust, dismay, discontent among Western societies, therefore making it more difficult for Western governments to govern.
I would like to see forced transparency for the platforms. I want to know how much hate speech they're taking down, how much targeted harassment, how many reports they get from users and what their response is, how different new mechanisms in the infrastructure of the platform are affecting user behavior. We might see racist tropes about name it. I mean, Ilhan Omar is a favorite for this sort of racist sexual rhetoric that's compounded the idea that she married her brother to immigrate to the United States. Rather than write the word bitch, they will use an exclamation point instead of an I. Or they will use visual memes to avoid textual detection. So one of the things that I get pretty frequently as a woman in my 30s without children is I get sent pictures of empty egg cartons, which are meant to remind me that my fertility is waning.
Critical race theory has become one of those hot button issues that the Republicans and other, disinformers who are engaged in disinformation for profit, frankly, there are plenty of, media outlets that are making money off of this too, have seized on.
Disinformation affects us in real life too, whether it's about people who aren't taking the COVID vaccine or people who are causing these public safety threats at public buildings, or beyond, people who are deciding now to take medicine meant for livestock and animals instead of the COVID vaccine. And I think in terms of our response, we have absolutely not done enough on any level. We've not seen enough recognition from consecutive administrations, both the Trump administration, certainly, which used disinformation, and the Biden administration, which is trying to clean up after what the Trump administration did.
There's a delicate balance between preserving freedom of speech and countering
And then Harold says,
disinformation.
you wasn't sure what to call it. It's the Disinformation Governance Board, or DGB. In honor of KGB, because that's what it is. It's the thought police. This is a person who doesn't say mom. She says birth person. She also says Twitter is for cis-normative white males. So she's a woke bot.
Information laundering is really quite ferocious. It's when a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. When Rudy Giuliani shared bad intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo, and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice, or vote. Oh!
This woman has spent a ton of time on TikTok, which is the Chinese Communist Party's largest espionage tool in the world. I find that an interesting thing, given her experience, according to the press secretary, of bringing a lot of perspective on disinformation to this job when she spent so much time on TikTok engaging on that platform. Seems to me she belongs on Broadway, not in a government job.
Give you a sense of who she is. She's an expert on online disinformation. She was formerly in the Wilson Center as she was formerly a disinformation fellow at the Wilson Center. She's testified before Congress as well as the United Kingdom and European Parliament, advised a Ukrainian foreign minister, particularly relevant in this moment under the auspices of a Fulbright Public Policy Fellowship and overseeing Russia and Belarus programs at the National Democratic Institute. Any hiring decisions are up to the Department of Homeland Security, but this is a person with extensive qualifications.
Now, she's not simply a hypocrite. She obviously is, whether she knows it or not. She would be too dim to understand hypocrisy. What she really is, of course, is a heavy for the Democratic Party, and she's done that job flawlessly. Nina Jankowicz, the disinformation hunter, once called the Hunter Biden laptop story, which is entirely true, a, quote, Trump campaign product. In October of 2020, she wrote, quote, voters deserve the context, not a fairy tale about a laptop repair shop. Now, did she give us the context or any countervailing facts? Did she deliver the truth about that story? No, of course not. She just read a bunch of lies somebody handed to her on a card because she's a useful idiot.
As if they don't have enough issues to deal with, they now have an idea, and I honestly thought this was just a belated April Fool's joke, but they are actually going to create in the Department of Homeland Security a Bureau of Disinformation. It's basically a ministry of truth. And what they want to do is they want to be able to put out false narratives without people being able to speak out and fight back. They want to be able to say things like Russia collusion and perpetuate hoaxes and then have people like us be silenced. They want to be able to advocate for COVID lockdowns. They want to be able to advocate for school closures, things that are not supported by the evidence, but then when you speak out, they want to stifle dissent. And so we reject this bureau in the state of Florida. We believe it's essential that individual Floridians and Americans are able to speak out against false narratives trying to be jammed down our throats by this regime. We know they actually appointed somebody to lead it who herself has been an advocate for COVID lockdowns, who herself has put out disinformation about the Hunter Biden tapes, who supported Russia collusion conspiracy theories. And so this is not acceptable. And in Florida, we're not going to have it. And so let's get real here. Let's start dealing with issues that people actually care about. Let's stop trying. You know, when you're not doing well, there's two ways to do it. You can try to do better, and so then maybe people will like what you're doing better, or you can try to shut up everybody who's criticizing your bad policies. It seems like they're trying to do the latter. They want to stifle dissent. And I can feel, though, the public is sick of this, and you also see it with Elon Musk purchasing Twitter. You know, they wanted to use Twitter as a way to enforce the narrative. You know, when you do things like talk about things that conflict with what people like Fauci say or whatever, and these are very eminent people who will come out and show how what he's saying is wrong, they will silence, they'll deplatform you, they will censor you. And so that is something for a free society to not be able to speak out on these major platforms where so much speech goes on. You know, that's a huge, huge problem. And Musk saw that. And Musk saw people being censored. He saw websites like the Babylon Bee, a satire site, being locked out because they had the temerity to do satire about some of the transgender ideology. And so what he's doing, I don't think the board wanted to accept the offer, but they had to because financially it makes sense. And we let it be known in Florida, since our state pension fund has shares of Twitter, that we would absolutely hold the board of directors accountable if they breach their fiduciary duty. They've got to do what's right in the interest of the shareholders. They can't reject Musk's offer because they're worried that he's going to open it up and for political reasons. And so I think that shows you there's a lot of momentum now behind having free speech. A lot of momentum so that people can speak the truth, particularly speaking the truth to a very decaying and discredited ruling elite in this country. And so this is going to be potentially an engine where the American people can speak the truth and fight back. But clearly, our entire principles that the country was founded on you cannot have a ministry of truth in this country. And so let's get real here. Let's make sure that we're doing things to benefit Floridians and Americans, but we're not going to let Biden get away with this one. So we'll be fighting back.
Former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard is with us. How do you feel? How do you feel about the Ministry of Truth?
This is the kind of thing that you see in dictatorships, this Ministry of Truth, this Department of Propaganda that the Biden administration has just stood up. And the reason why you see this in dictatorships is because they're afraid of us. They're afraid of the people. They're afraid that we might actually think for ourselves. And so now they've created this body that will do two things. Number one, it'll use taxpayer dollars to work through the mainstream media and flood the airwaves with whatever their propaganda narrative is that they're pushing at any given time, and try to drown out anyone with alternate views. And number two, they will silence dissenting voices through intimidation. I think the thing to recognize with this, just real quick, is that this isn't something new. This is something that they have already been doing, that's happening right now. The only difference is they're formalizing it, making it official, which, if there's a silver lining in this, it is they're revealing exactly who they are and why they're doing it, what they're trying to accomplish. And it allows us, the American people, to stand up and say, hey, you know what? We're not going to let you get away with this crap. We will take a stand, we will reject it, and we will throw out of office those who are continuing to push and propagate this undemocratic, anti-free speech mission.
Number one, that what this office, what this working group does, because it's not an office, what this working group does is ensure that there are guardrails, definitions, standards to make sure that the free speech rights, the civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights of individuals.
So do you think COVID disinformation threatens our national security?
And number two, if I may, Senator, and number two, is it your proposition that when the cartels spread disinformation with respect to our immigration policies to try to lure vulnerable migrants to our border illegally?
I think you've got no idea what disinformation is, and I don't think the government's capable of it. Do you know who the greatest propagator of disinformation in the history of the world is? The U.S. government. Are you familiar with McNamara, the Pentagon Papers? Are you familiar with George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction? Are you familiar with Iran-Contra? I mean, think of all the debates and disputes we've had over the last 50 years in our country. We work them out by debating them. We don't work them out by the government being the arbiter. I don't want guardrails. I want you to have nothing to do with speech. You think we can't determine, speech by traffickers is disinformation? You think the American people are so stupid they need you to tell them what the truth is? You can't even admit what the truth is with the Steele dossier. I don't trust government to figure out what the truth is. Government is largely disseminating disinformation. So I do have a question, and here's the question. So the Russians, maybe some cartels. What about COVID disinformation? Is that in your bailiwick for your disinformation governance board?
Senator, you would have to give me the details with.
Okay, here. I've said a million times that cloth masks don't work. YouTube takes me down. They're a private company. I can have that beef with them. What about you? You going to look at that? I often say that natural immunity from having had the infection is equal to the vaccine or better. You going to take that down?
Well, first of all,
those are very specific.
Senator, first of all, it's not for us to take it down. And second of all,
are you going to put information out there saying that I'm spreading disinformation?
Senator, we are not the public health experts to make those determinations.
So public health won't be part of the Disinformation Governance Board. No COVID disinformation. Yes or no?
Senator?
Yes or no? Is public health going to be part of your censorship group?
Somebody allow me, because you're presenting hypotheticals that are vague, ambiguous.
I just gave you a very specific one on cloth masks. I gave you a very specific one on immunity from previous infection.
I answered your question, but let me answer the last question that you posed. Do not, under any circumstances, accept a vaccine at a FEMA overseen vaccination center because they are actually peddling fentanyl. Now, should I sit back and take that, or should I actually disseminate accurate information? That's what we would do. Should FEMA issue accurate information that the vaccinations that we are administering in the sites that we oversee actually are the COVID-19 vaccines?
I have a greater respect for the American people than you do. I think the American people can figure out the truth. And if you think the American people need to be told there's not fentanyl in the vaccination, feel free to say it. But the thing is if you are going to go around saying that you are the arbiter of information and of disinformation, I think you have no clue. And you don't have the perspective history knowing that disinformation, the largest progenitor of disinformation in our history has probably been the U.S. government.
Today.